Hello, welcome back. It's me, Speedy again, and welcome to Lesson 3 of the Basic Flight Course series. In this video, we're going to be going over the ground school portion of Lesson 3, but before we can get started, let's get the legal stuff out of the way first. This isn't real flight training, nor can it be used in lieu of real-world flight training. Some techniques and procedures taught here are based on real-world techniques, but are adapted for simulator use. All techniques, procedures, and concepts are from public open source documents. All opinions and comments stated in this video series are those of the producer and do not reflect any official policy of the DoD or its components. Alright, let's get this show on the road. Our learning objectives for today will be going over the fundamentals of two-ship operations and formation flying. By the end of the day, you should have the foundational knowledge to be able to understand how two-ship operations typically work and some common standard operating procedures for two-ship operations. Let's go ahead and get started. Startup and ground operations isn't all that different between a single ship and a two-ship. There are just some additional comm checks involved. Once your aircraft is started up and ready to roll, the lead will do a radio check with you on all the radios you have available. Usually, most military aircraft have at least 2 radios. When they do, usually the flight lead will have one radio reserved for comms outside the flight, and the second for comms within the flight. Lead will check both radios. Once that is complete, you inform lead that you are ready to taxi. All comms outside of the flight will be done by the lead, or by whoever they delegate that responsibility to. When taxiing, leave separation between the 2 aircraft and ideally offset to either side of the taxiway. You see this example right here. Lead is here on the right-hand side, which means 2 would be on the left. If lead were on the left side, then 2 would be on the right. In real life, the type of takeoff will be briefed ahead of time. In DCS, it might not be a bad idea, particularly with newer or less experienced pilots, to do a quick takeoff briefing to ensure everybody's on the same page for what will happen during takeoff and departure. Contracts are a set of parameters that the formation expects that do not have to be verbalized by lead. These are typically established by lead during the pre-flight briefing. For the context of formation flying, they need to include a takeoff and departure information, so the type of takeoff you're going to do, the direction of departure, the initial heading for the departure, what formation type you guys are going to do at the beginning of your flight, the type of rejoin that's going to be, what is the rejoin airspeed going to be, what's the cruise speed going to be once established. All of this information is what the flight should know in order for it to have a successful multi-ship flight. If this information isn't briefed prior to the flight, it should be settled on and disseminated to the flight prior to taking off. Any changes from these need to be verbalized by lead as soon as practical, but the contracts establish that baseline for everybody to work off of. That being said, there are some standard contracts that are pretty universal. For lead, his responsibility is ensure that there are no obstacles or obstructions or traffic in front of the flight, plan ahead of the formation, think about what's coming up next and setting up the flight for the highest probability of success while maintaining flight integrity. Monitor number 2, ensure that 2 is doing what they need to be doing when they need to be doing it. Navigation for the flight. Lead is responsible for ensuring the flight gets to where they need to be when they need to be there. And then communication. Lead is responsible for doing all the communicating outside of the flight. So lead will be the one talking to tower, to ground, to any outside agencies. Lead will be representing the entire flight. The only thing 2 needs to do in regards to the radio is pretty much just respond with 2. Unless an explanation or discussion is needed, the entire conversation is going to be 2. A good example of that would be say lead says Jedi 1-2, Jedi 1-1, go left echelon, or Jedi flight, go left echelon. The only response 2 is going to have is 2. For the wingman, pretty much rule number 1 is do not hit lead. Okay, they tend to get a little cranky when you start bumping up against their aircraft. Okay, keep one in sight. Always keep it in sight. Be in position and on frequency. Okay, so as you're flying the aircraft, as you're maintaining position and whatnot, when lead calls for frequency changes, make sure you follow along. Okay, you're the backup for clearing traffic for the formation, and you're backing up number 1 as far as navigation goes. So you are also responsible for ensuring that the flight is on where they need to be when they need to be. So not only are you maintaining position, but you're double checking all your nav things as well. It's part of maintaining situational awareness. Formation takeoffs come in 2 different versions. You have formation and interval. They both are set up the same way, just like with taxiing, lead picks one side, wingman picks the other side. Wingman wants to pull forward until they are even with the horizontal stabs of the lead's aircraft. Let's talk about formation takeoff. This one is tricky. It requires good coordination and timing between both pilots. This is basically what the Thunderbirds, Blue Angels, or any other demonstration squadron does. They are in formation and in position right from the start of the takeoff roll, clear through rotation, through takeoff, and all the way into departure. They are in formation the entire time. This we will not be teaching in this course. The other option is interval takeoff. Let's talk about interval takeoff just a little bit more here. The interval takeoff is the most common because it's the easiest to execute and has a good margin for error built into it. Basically, the aircraft in formation take off in a predetermined timing interval. For simplicity and uniformity, for this course, we're going to use 7 seconds. The way it is executed is that lead will call lead rolling and then release brakes and start their takeoff roll. Once the wingman sees them start moving, they will start counting to 7 seconds. Then they will call 2 rolling and then begin their takeoff roll. In case of an aborted takeoff, there's ample room for both pilots to react and not risk hitting each other. Let's go over some basic terms and concepts for formation flying first. First term you're going to hear is 3-9 line. If you were to draw a line through the aircraft from wingtip to wingtip, that's the 3-9 line. So when you hear the term 3-9 line in the context of aviation, this is what we're referring to. Behind the 3-9 line and in front of the 3-9 line. But since we are flying aircraft in a three-dimensional space, it's not always static like that. Both aircraft move around and change headings. That is when the concept of turn circle comes into play. Turn circle is simply a term to describe the path of the aircraft or the arc that it could take while executing a turn. Looking at this example here, the blue path is the flight path of the aircraft and it's drawing as it's turning the circle. And you can either be inside the circle, which is this gray area here within the middle or inner part of the circle drawn, or outside the circle, which would be the outside this blue limit here. The next term you're going to hear is line of sight. So line of sight in regular terms is being able to see what you're looking at. That's in line of sight in regular everyday life. In aviation term, line of sight is merely talking about when you look at the other aircraft, what the aircraft is doing within relation of you. And most of them will use the canopy as a way of measuring that. Okay, movement along the canopy, movement either forward line of sight movement, which basically means it is moving forward of you, it's moving towards or further into the front part of your 3-9 line, or aft line of sight movement, which basically means it's moving closer to your tail, so it's moving back behind the 3-9 line. Next, we're going to start going after a couple of different concepts that basically make up the geometry of running a rejoin or doing a rejoin or two aircraft moving in relation to each other. The first one we're going to cover is going to be closure rate. Closure rate is, simply put, the rate at which two aircraft are approaching each other. And it can either be positive or a negative number. Positive number meaning they're getting closer and closer, and a negative number meaning the distance is building between them. In some aircraft, you can actually see it described as VC speed. So it's a big V with a little c next to it. Let's take a look at these two examples here on the bottom. So this one here on the left shows the trailing aircraft is traveling at 350 knots, and the lead aircraft is traveling at 300 knots. That speed differential means that the trailing aircraft has a closure rate of positive 50 knots. So this means that the distance is decreasing at a rate of 50 knots. Because it's in trail and there's zero angular difference between the two, it's a pure mathematical problem of 50 knots closure. The next example here on the right is where the trailing aircraft is flying 300 knots and the lead aircraft is flying 350 knots. That means that has a negative closure rate of 50 knots. That means the distance is increasing at a rate of 50 knots. Okay, speed, this closure rate speed differential is just one part of the equation that makes up how to basically figure out closure rate in as a whole. So the next two concepts we're talking about is heading crossing angle and aspect angle. These are huge, very, very important for establishing a good rejoin and intercept, right? These are huge concepts, and we really need to understand these because you're going to see these again when it comes up to tactical concepts like basic fighter maneuvers, tactical intercept, things like that. Heading crossing angle is this angular difference here between the nose of one aircraft and the nose of the other aircraft. So if these two aircraft are joining, that difference in heading is your heading crossing angle. It's your angle of intercept is kind of the easiest way of thinking about it, right? Aspect angle is the positional difference between the two aircraft. Okay, it is completely independent of nose position for the joining aircraft, right? So his nose position has no bearing, but aspect angle is expressed in the angular difference from the tail of the aircraft that you're trying to join in, or the other aircraft, right? So this anything that's considered high aspect, you'd be closer to the nose area. Anything considered low aspect, you're closer to the tail area, right? So he's kind of neutral, moving towards tail. He's kind of in the forward position here in the high aspect, right? So it just depends from your perspective what it is. Rejoining aircraft want to be on the lower aspect. You want to be back here. Okay, the two aspects you're going to see most often here in training are going to be 30-degree aspect, as you see from this picture here, and 45. And you can see the angular difference in the picture. That's the kind of differences that you need to notice as a pilot when you're trying to rejoin or get positioning in another aircraft. Okay, like look where the tail is in relation to the outboard wing. How much of the canopy can you see? Things like that, right? You're going to be looking for those little visual cues. A couple of different pursuit geometries as well that come into place. Lead is basically referring when you see somebody say pull lead, this is the concept they're talking about, right? So the nose position is going to determine that. So your nose position, if it's in front of the aircraft you're trying to rejoin on, right, that is called pulling lead. That means you're leading that aircraft. As long as your nose is in front of the plane of motion that the other aircraft is moving, right? So by putting your aircraft in lead, you are increasing, right? You're decreasing that heading crossing angle. You're making this slice right here a little bigger, right? So if gets put up here, you see how that angular difference decreases. Well, what that does is it allows you to manage your closure rate by angles, not necessarily simply speed. So I was saying that angles can have a big effect on closure rate. Well, the more you stretch this out, the faster you're going to rejoin on that other aircraft, right? Then you have pure. Basically, what that means is you're pointing your nose straight at the other aircraft. Okay, this is another way of managing your energy, right? So you're increasing the angle a little bit, but the way that it works is you end up falling in behind the rejoining aircraft. You end up falling in trail because all you're doing is keeping your nose on him as it goes, right? So this actually creates an angle that slows the closure rate on pure geometry, as opposed to lead, where it's increasing, where you're going to end up joining up, where this one slows the closure rate and slides you behind the other target. Okay. The next one is lag. So lag simply means that your nose is falling in behind the other aircraft, right? So you're putting your nose behind them. You end up really managing your closure rate drops quite a bit in here, and it almost goes almost to only having speed as the overtaking factor, right? So this allows you balancing these three concepts, these three geometries, allows you to manage your closure rate without needing to add additional thrust, right? Because if we manipulate the thrust, we're using fuel. But if you manipulate geometry, you're not using fuel. It's a lot more fuel efficient. It just takes some forethought and playing with the angles in order to get it to work right. Okay, so rejoins come in three different types. You have the running rejoin, turning rejoin, and head-to-head. Let's talk about the running rejoin first. Okay, so running rejoin basically means is that you are rejoining the other aircraft from the tail, right? You're in trail essentially, so you're behind them like ducks in a row, and you're overtaking him purely based on speed. So your speed differential is your closure rate, and then you're going to catch up to him and then slide in. This is the most common one that we end up finding ourselves in DCS, and it's probably the easiest concept to understand because there's no change in angles. There's no, it's relatively a simple matter of catch up and get into the position. Problem is that a lot of people in DCS end up doing this wrong. The reason they end up doing this wrong is because they end up approaching from dead 6, almost dead even over here. Get closer and then try and slide in over here. That is wrong. Reason being is because if you approach from dead 6, you're looking at the knife edge. You're looking at probably the smallest profile of the other aircraft, which is very, very hard to tell your closure rate to them, even in real life. Okay, 1 second they're a little small, and next second they're just massive in your canopy, and you have to do a mad, brake left or brake right or up or down, whatever the case may be, in order to bleed the energy and trying not to overshoot or not hit them in general. Okay? So what you want to do is instead of coming in from dead 6, you want to offset a little bit. Okay, come in from the oblique. So you stretch out and you come out over here, then you pull forward, and as you get closer and you get this angle, you want this 30-degree bearing angle. Once you get that 30-degree bearing angle, then you start getting in a little closer. Okay, and we'll show you how that sight picture works out. Turning rejoin, okay? So a turning rejoin just basically means is that you're intercepting the other aircraft or you're rejoining on the other aircraft in a turn. Now, this one tends to be the one that looks great on videos. This is the one that you end up seeing air demonstration squadrons do this rejoin. You get your solos and rejoin on the lead. Problem is that this is the one that's probably the easiest to mess up. Reason being is because it's not only your speed that is determining your closure rate, it is now your speed and the geometry, right? Because if you look at this image here, if you turn inside this angle here, you're inside his turn circle. And so now you have angles, and he's turning into you, and you're approaching him. And with that angular change, your closure rate's going to increase without your airspeed going up. So it can very quickly go from a very slow and controlled closure rate to a very high closure rate that you now don't know what to do with. Very easily for that to happen. So this is the type of rejoin where you need to pay attention to all of the factors and really kind of focus in and make sure and monitor your closure rate. And the third one is head-to-head rejoin. Head-to-head rejoin just simply means you guys are headed in opposite directions, and then you end up doing a turn in order to end up in formation with them. Okay. This is probably one of the hardest ones to pull off, and can lead to a running rejoin. Is typically the way it works out if you mess up. All right. So you end up in trail and you just do a running rejoin. Good rule of thumb is you want him 5 nautical miles off your nose, and then roughly about the 10 o'clock position or so, right? So once he's in that position, you can start your turn. You want to pull your nose across and put your nose on him for a few seconds until you get the aspect angle you're looking for, and then you move your nose into lead. Once you start this turn right here, you're going to put your nose on him until you get to about this point. Then you're going to pull your nose in lead, and then gently just kind of rejoin on him. Okay? It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of getting a feel for how to gauge that turn and gauge the rejoin. Okay, so what visual cues are we looking for, right, to know that we can set it up a good rejoin? You look here on this image over here on the left, right? So you have these 2 spots. So you draw a line from the top of the HUD and the bottom of the HUD. And this is going to be pretty universal for most aircraft, right? If you can put the rejoining, so this one right here is your rejoining aircraft, you put that rejoining aircraft right around the 1 o'clock position, somewhere in this area, right? So between these 2 lines and right around the 1 area, so somewhere in this box, and you keep them there. And the easiest way of keeping them there is using your bank angle, right? So you're going to use your left hand to control your throttle, your overtake speed, and you're going to use your right hand, your control stick, to maintain that aspect angle. So as long as you keep him in this spot right over here, in this box right in here, if it's a level or a running rejoin, then, and as he gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you maintain him here, okay? That's perfect. That's going to give you the perfect angle. You're going to see him. You're going to be offset. So if you end up overshooting him, like blowing right past him with too much airspeed because you didn't manage right, you're not going to hit him like you would if you were directly behind him. So you just cruise past him. You pull the throttle. You'll go idle. You just wait. Be patient. Let him pass you again, and then you try again. That's a level. On a turning one, you want him just below that. You want him over here. But it's the exact same thing. Use your bank angle, manage your closure rate with your throttle and the bank angle, and just kind of play with it there, right? Then as he gets bigger, see how he gets bigger? He stays in that same spot and gets bigger. That's when you start transitioning. You start transitioning from here to a little bit more aft line of sight. Remember, we're going to hear that. So you're going to put him from the 1 o'clock to almost a 2 or 2:30 position. Let's take a look at this example here of how to run a rejoin. So you can see here, the aircraft that we're trying to rejoin on is this black dot right here, which, as mentioned previously, we're going to try and keep between the top of the HUD glass, the bottom of the HUD glass, and roughly our 1 o'clock position. So we're managing the position using a little bit of pitch, a little bit of bank angle, and you'll see it progressively getting bigger and bigger. And again, little adjustments here and there. The videos speed up to kind of compress down the time frame, but it still applies. So now we're going to transition it back to about the 2:30 position or so behind the canopy rail. Even though it's behind the canopy, we know it's there. Okay, now it's there. So now we're going to increase our bank angle a little bit here and our heading crossing angle and get it a little closer. Little by little. We're sliding in. We're closing the distance in a very controlled manner. So now we're stacked a little low. We'll end up climbing up into it. You see it's not moving in the canopy relation-wise, but it is getting bigger and bigger. And that's how we manage that closure rate. That's how we manage the position. We just slide right into it here. There we go. General power inputs, general bank inputs. A little low, but as you can see, it works. Okay, so once we've got the rejoin, what sight picture are we looking for, right? So what we're looking for, this is from the Air Force T6 fundamental flight manuals. And we're going to be kind of borrowing that because the sight picture actually works for both the T6 and the A29. Right, so you, as the pilot, the sight picture you're looking for is going to be this one right here on the bottom left. Right, so you want to put the spinner of the aircraft just after the tip or near the letters. You're going to see TDCS down here on the bottom, or U.S. Air Force or whatever. You want it somewhere between that trailing edge of the wingtip and those letters there. That's going to put you in that right spot. It's going to put you just 30 degrees aft of the 3-9 line. Okay, it's going to look like 45, but it's not quite 45. Actually, a little bit more forward than that. Right, and if you maintain this sight picture, looking through basically through the wing to the spinner, you're going to be slightly low, and that's what you want to be. You want to be just slightly low and slightly aft of lead. Okay. Now, when you're adjusting your positions and making sure that you want to stay in position, you always want to do it in this order: rate of closure, which is going to be your bank angle and a little bit of your throttle. You want to adjust height, so your pitch control, and lateral position, right? And again, bank angle is going to adjust your lateral position there. So let's take a look here at maintaining position, right? So he's slipping away a little bit, so he's going to close in. There we go, and it brings it forward. Now, he's slightly aft of where he needs to be. He probably needs to put that spinner a little bit closer to the C and the S over there on the TDCS. There we go. That's a much better sight picture. And see how he scooted forward there? He's just using micro bank and micro throttle corrections to hold position. But this is the sight picture right here is what you're looking for to be in proper position for a two-ship flight. Right? You want wingmen should be seeing this. This is the sight picture they're holding. And their entire focus is just looking at lead, making micro corrections, and just kind of maintaining that sight picture. If the sight picture changes, then you make the appropriate corrections to put it in the right spot. Okay, so let's look over formations, right? So formations can be split into two categories. You have administrative formations and you have tactical formations. So administrative is going to be echelon, finger four, fighting wing, and trail. Tactical is going to be line abreast, wedge, and trail. Now, administrative ones, okay, are designed around keeping the flight together and basically keeping them close so that the lead can manage the group and air traffic control can manage the group, right? So typically the spacing for Administrative stuff is going to be either close or cruise, and close basically being 2 to 20 feet or so. So roughly 1 to 2, airplane width and whatnot. And then cruise is going to be between basically like 20 feet ish, 20 to 40 feet, and 150 feet. So you're talking roughly about 2 to 3 airplane widths, something like that, right? So with close spacing basically being like air show formation, kind of a deal, and cruise basically what you're doing everything else. The reason being is because the closer you are, the more workload it is for the wingman to hold position. The closer they are, the more they have to focus. The crew space it out a little bit, they're going to have room, right? Room to kind of there's some margin for error there. They can look at an instrument for a few seconds and come back. Their workload is considerably lower. Okay? Now, for the tactical formation, those spacing is typically around 2 miles. It's between a mile and 2 miles, and there can be altitude differences as much as 2,000 feet, right? And tactical is more designed around mutual support, where they're checking each other's six and looking out for each other, and being able to bring weapon systems as quickly as possible to bear on a target. So we'll be covering those in a later course. Let's talk about echelon formation. So echelon formation is basically where all the aircraft are lined up on one side of lead, right? So it's echelon left or echelon right. Okay, this is the most standard one that you're going to find for AAR. So for air-to-air refueling, you're going to be in echelon formation, and then in overhead brakes. So when you're coming in to land as a flight, you're going to end up being in echelon formation. Okay, it's easily scalable, meaning you can put 2, 3, 4, 5 aircraft on this. You just add them into the line, basically, right? Um, when you're in echelon and there's a turn, it's called an echelon turn, right? Basically, what you're doing is, let's take a look at this image over here on the bottom left, and you're going to basically put the horizon straight down the middle of that aircraft, right? You're going to maintain the same altitude as them, and you're going to basically split the horizon with their aircraft. That's a sight picture. You're maintaining the same aspect. You're maintaining that 30 degrees aspect that we talked about with the formation position, but you're just staying in the same altitude. So your sight picture changes a little bit, but you're just kind of staying in that same spot, right? You're holding this new sight picture right here. Okay. The next one is finger four. Now this is the one everybody loves doing. This is the most popular one in DCS because it looks the coolest. But it's also probably the hardest one to hold. Why? Because this particular formation, especially with turns, it gets a bit of a challenge because you're maintaining the sight picture no matter what. So with finger four formations, this is the ones where it's easily broken up into elements, right? So you have 1 and 2 on one element, and 3 and 4 is the other. Okay, so you have 1 lead, and then 2 on one side, and then 3 and 4 on the other. And if you hold up your fingers, that's why it's called the finger four formation. Because the 4 fingers of your hand, middle finger being lead, and then your pointer finger being 2, and then ring and pinky being 3 and 4, you can see how that looks very similar to that, right? Nice thing, it looks the coolest. This is the one that all the demonstration squadrons work. Now here's the kicker though, the hard part. So the turn, a finger four turn, you are maintaining the sight picture the entire time, meaning that when lead banks, you're actually going to descend in relation to him, as you see in this image right here. You're going to descend in relation to him and keep that same sight picture and just kind of stay there. And if he's turning away from you, you're going to climb in relation to him a little bit and maintain that sight picture. Okay. Echelon turns, everybody stays at the same altitude. For finger four turns, because of that stack, you see how that altitude stack is happening? Once you start getting into four shift spread spacing or cruise spacing, you're talking about a couple thousand feet of difference in altitude. It can end up stretching out that far. Well, a couple of thousand feet in altitude for a single formation is a lot of space, especially when you're trying to come in for landing. Air traffic controllers hate it because they might be stacking aircraft every 1,000 feet into the airspace, right? So finger four is great for air shows. It's great if it's a two ship. Might be okay with a two ship, but sometimes it's just not the right choice because it takes up so much room. So keep that in mind. They're two different tools. They're in your tool belt. Get familiar with both of them. Okay, so let's say we end up overshooting, right? So you've messed up the rejoin for some odd reason, and you've got some overshoot. Overshoot basically means is that you have too much energy coming into it, and you're going to go right past your rejoin, right? Unless you do something to kind of offset it or to combat it, right? Okay, so it's all about energy management at this point, right? So you need, if you manage your energy properly going into the rejoin, you're not going to overshoot. But if you don't, you have excess energy you need to bleed, right? So if you remember in the first lesson, we were talking about angle of attack and how when you increase the angle of attack, it creates drag, and that basically starts slowing down the aircraft, right? And so when we spoke about steep turns, right, you had to pull back a little bit, increase the nose up. Well, that was increasing angle of attack and increasing your drag, therefore slowing down the aircraft. We're doing the exact same thing here, right? So for an underrun, for a safe underrun, when you come into the rejoin, if you have extra energy, what you're doing is you're sliding underneath to the outside, right? Which then gives you a little bit extra room. And since you're sliding to the outside of their turn, you're also now increasing the distance you need to travel. Now combine that with a kind of a hard turn here. Once you get out here, you're going to pull back on that, give a little firm pull. That firm pull is going to bleed energy as well. So if you're an idle, you see this coming, you go idle, slide in underneath, or you pull back on the throttle and slide in underneath, and then you pull, give it a firm little pull over here on the back end, that's going to bleed. It's going to bleed additional energy and allow you to be able to slip into formation a lot better. But you always slide underneath. This is why when you rejoin on lead, you're always lower than they are. Okay, you want to maintain them above you because there's canopy there for you to be able to see what's going on. You maintain visual on him the entire time. And remember the rules for wingman: never hit one. Okay. The other one that is a common correction, right, which is basically like a quarter turn, right, or high yo-yo. So what it is that you're going to roll in, and as you're approaching lead, you realize you have a lot more energy than what undershoot would end up bleed off. So now you're going to exchange energy for altitude. So you're going to pull the nose up a little bit, get above them. Remember I said, like, keep them above you so you can see? This is the only case where that's not going to be that's not going to be it. You're going to pull the nose up a little bit. You're going to bleed off the energy. You're going to basically over rotate or roll past 90 or almost to 90 and let the nose come down, get visual again, and then rejoin on him. Okay? This doesn't need to be a drastic like 40 degrees nose up. This can be something gentle as 10 to 15 degrees nose up. Super gentle. Comes up, bleeds, comes down, revisual, and then rejoin. Right? So this isn't something you're going to want to do when you're super close, but you need to manage, you need to realize what you're managing, what your energy is as you're approaching, right? So now we have cross under. So say you're on the right side and lead tells you that they need you on the left side or vice versa, right? So this is called there's a way of doing that where it's safely done. And you can see it in videos and whatnot, and we'll do a demo of it in just a minute. But basically the way it works is you're going to slow down just a little bit. You're going to come aft. You're going to drop down, come all the way under, go scoot over to the other side, come up, and then come forward. All right, so it's back, down, under, up, forward. Super simple, and it's not back a lot. You're talking back maybe 50 feet, if that. It's back a little bit, and the more comfortable you get with it, and the better you get with it, the tighter you can make this cross under. Right? You're not going to want to go straight here. You want to come back a little bit and go under. The reason you don't want it to come straight back here, there's an actual technique. It's called the V cross under. But the problem is that V cross under is actually probably one of the more higher risk ones because you're trying to change your aspect, you're trying to change altitude and position all at the same time. Problem is if you misjudge it and you come this way, what ends up happening is you end up bumping up against lead because you're trying to make that as tight as you can, and you end up in lead and you didn't change your altitude quick enough, or you put in too much bank. All of these factors. If you come straight back just a little bit, then come down, 20 feet or so, 20 or 40 feet, cut across, and then come up and then forward and close the distance, in a much more controlled fashion, and there's room for error. Okay, let's take a look at this example here of what a cross under looks like. So you tip down and scoot over and come up, and then you're going to move forward. And because it was in a turn, yeah, once you went to the outside, you automatically slip back. Yep, and then pulls forward into position. A little sucked, but that worked. Okay, so formation landing types, right? So there's a couple of different types of landings, formation landings we can do. You have the overhead brake, which splits aircraft into individual landing elements, so they're spaced in intervals. And then you have formation landings. Formation landings, officially the Air Force doesn't even do these anymore. There was just too much high risk in the real world. They look cool. Some demo squadrons still do them, but they are difficult. And the reason they're difficult is because wingman is maintaining position the entire time throughout the entire approach, and typically they'll do it like a long straight in for this one. He's in position the entire time, all the way in, so he's bouncing between position and landing target. So that formation, that attention is split, and then you're not only maintaining position, but trying to maintain a good, clean approach speed and whatnot. So it's a definite kind of coordination thing, right? But we're not going to be covering that in this course. So overhead brakes, right? So an overhead brake is the easiest and quickest way of getting an entire flight down quickly, right? And they look super cool when you do them anyway. Okay. So the way it works is the flight flies over the upwind side of the aircraft. So their initial is basically the exact same direction they're intending to land. They approach the runway, and then they brake, and each element breaks in set intervals, right? So it can be anything from 4 to 5 seconds or whatever the case may be. It's usually just a brief interval. There's a couple of different schools of thought of when to do this break. Some teach the runway threshold, some teach touchdown marker, some teach midpoint, some teach far runway. What I would recommend is getting into the habit of doing the initial break, either the threshold or the touchdown point. The reason being I'm saying that is because once you start getting into 5 ship breaks, if lead breaks midfield or on the far side, the 3 and 4 elements, once you start stacking those seconds, okay, ends up adding up quite a bit. So the approach speed for a overhead brake is typically 350 knots. So now you're traveling at almost 6 miles a minute. 6 miles a minute, you do the math, right? That's 20 seconds. You're talking 2 miles, right? And so you're covering a mile in 10 seconds. The distance adds up very quickly. If you do the brake at the beginning of the field, those runways are almost a mile long. So by the time that 3 and 4 get sequenced in, they're braking just past the end of the runway. So you're maintaining the entire flight within airspace of the airfield, right? Then the point of this whole thing is to get the entire flight down as quickly and as safely as possible. So once each is separated, each one flies their own approach and their own approach to landing, right? Now, because you have these guys sequenced in and they're landing fairly quick intervals behind each other, you're talking 30 seconds, right? 30 to 40 seconds apiece. Okay, that usually isn't enough time for the aircraft that's on the runway to get off the runway. So you establish what's called hot side and cold side. Hot side meaning the side that where you are landing. The cold side is when you have the landing under control and you're at taxi speed and you just scoot over. The reason you want to do that is because if one of the aircraft in the flight has an issue and they need to go around, or their brakes fail, or whatever the case may be, or they didn't get on the brakes fast enough, right? They need a clear lane in front of them to be able to overshoot the other aircraft on the runway without hitting them. Okay? I've been there when the brakes have failed or somebody forgot to put their gear down, whatever failure came up, and you could see they did a formation, a 3-4 ship formation, and number 3 is the one that went belly up, and he went screeching down the runway and basically went right in between everybody down the center line. That was pure luck. Okay, so hot side, cold side is the most common way of doing a formation landing such as this, right? The way you typically know which side's going to be hot and which side's going to be cold is you want to establish the cold side in the direction you're going to exit the runway. So if your taxiway that you're aiming for when you're landing is on the left, cold side's left, hot side's right. If the taxiway is on the right side, hot side's left, cold side is right. Okay? A good kind of tip is when you're doing the timing, right? So when lead breaks, number 2 can either start counting and do the timing interval, or they can wait until lead is about the 90-degree point, and then they turn. And then they start their turn. Okay? 3 and 4, which we'll talk about, kind of getting different, is basically whatever the timing is between 1 and 2, that's the number they're counting for. And that establishes an even sequencing between the two. Okay, time to get some flight time. You and your partner, be sure to start the flight with a good solid briefing. Do not forget to include rejoin speeds and altitudes and cruise speeds and altitudes. Make sure that during your flight you practice rejoins, both turning and running, as well as holding position and transitioning from the left to the right, or right to left. And don't forget to work on recovery as a flight. Okay, get that overhead brake and whatnot pattern down. As always, please click on the like and subscribe button as they help build the channel and allow me to keep making these videos for you guys. I'll see you guys in the virtual skies.